Hello humans, today I wanted to talk about this guy right here. This is a Gerber clutch that I picked up recently at an antique store. Well, not all that recently, I've had it for a couple weeks and I've been playing with it in that time. But I picked it up from an antique store and I was looking into it and I wanted to share some of my thoughts and opinions. So this guy came out, near as I can tell, around the end of 2005, making this potentially as old as I am, just about, not quite, but close. And it ran until either sometime in 2010 is when I stopped finding like advertisements listing this, and 2018 is when I found the last review for this product on Amazon. So it had a decent run, somewhere between 5, which I think is a little bit short. On the flip side, 13 years is a fairly impressive run for most products nowadays. It came in 2 colors, this red version right here and a gray version. In 2006, it cost $23.5 US, which is not an insignificant amount of money, quite frankly. And by the end of its production cycle, it was $14.95 USD at knifecenter.com. It features T6 construction on all of the different screws. So the T6, this is our T6 bit. You do need 2 to adjust anything because these are not captive. All of these screws are T6, aircraft grade aluminum, which means fucking nothing, obviously, but aluminum scales, and then unnamed stainless steel tooling. So this is a very, very small pliers-based multi-tool. The pliers themselves are very thin. Let's actually take a quick look and see just how thin these guys are. The pliers themselves are quite thin and not very meaty. One of the common themes of the negative reviews were actually that the pliers had a tendency to break, and you can get a lot more leverage than these things, I think, are designed to take. So it's no surprise to me that it would lead to issues. Yeah, so that's only like 1/8 of an inch thick. Less. It's a hair less than 1/8 of an inch thick, which is very, very thin for a pair of pliers. They are square job pliers. Honestly, I found they work pretty well. The only thing I really dislike about this is the wire cutters at the base here, and that is because I am of the opinion that when it comes specifically to wire cutters, you have 2 choices. Make them replaceable or don't include them. And here's why. If you use your wire cutters ever, as soon as the wire cutters are done, the multi-tool is finished as far as you are concerned. Like you can't really sharpen them. Ones like this where you actually could theoretically get a sharpen or 2 out of them, but by and large with wire cutters, oh, and I hit my camera. By and large, when it comes to wire cutters, once they've gone dull, you basically have to replace the multi-tool. So you need to either have replaceable wire cutting bits, or you just don't need to include them. Again, this isn't really strong enough that I would rely on the wire cutters for doing anything, and they are very, very small wire cutters, so I don't think it's that important. But just in my opinion, wire cutters should not be on this. The actual pliers themselves work great, picking up things that were a little bit too hot or along that kind of a vein, worked pretty well. I don't necessarily think that you should be using these for tightening bolts or whatever, but you could do it on smaller bolts. I mean, don't be dumb, right? This is still a very small tool, but that's all we have on the inside. On our outside, we have 4 tools on what I'm going to call the front because it has the writing on it. Flathead and bottle opener. Flathead's pretty okay. Bottle opener's actually a little bit small. It does work, but it is definitely a little bit small. On the other side, we have a 2-dimensional Phillips. I don't like this. It does technically work. but I don't know. You're losing out on a lot more than you're gaining with something like this. I would honestly rather just have a tapered flathead. But again, it does, technically speaking, work well enough. So to that end, it is fine. Here on the other side, we have our pick tool or eyeglasses screwdriver. Worked really well for eyeglasses. I find it's more useful as a little pick or scraping tool, but it does come to a nice point, and it is actually a pretty useful little tool. If you do a lot of, if you have to undo a lot of staples, this is actually really, really nice for popping up staples, I found. And then on the other side, we have a little tiny pair of tweezers. Again, this fits comfortably in the category of better than nothing, but worse than most. Largely just, again, the comparison is always going to be the Victorinox. And these are just great, especially in comparison. But these have their uses. They are angled. You do have more of a point on them, but they don't open nearly as wide. And they can be a little bit more difficult to use just because you have this whole package behind them. All told, though, they worked. They could get metal splinters and wood splinters out of my fingers just fine. So they weren't amazing, but they did, in fact, work. On the back side, we have, well, right in the middle of the two tool sets, we have these markings that actually indicate which tools on which side. So on this side right here, we have a nail file. And it is, in fact, a fairly okay nail file and a nail cleaning tool. I actually really do rate the nail cleaning tool. It is one of the better ones that I have seen. The nail file is fine, 5 out of 10, about what you can expect from a drugstore or whatever. But it does work. And then on the other side, we have right here our marking and our blade. Again, unnamed stainless steel. Functions just fine. You've got a little bit of a tip. I don't know how much of mine is rounded over from use and how much of mine is rounded over from just not having been sharp from factory. It's obviously this thing has seen some use, but it does still have a very good edge that might just be having been resharpened over time. This is a very useful little blade shape. I mean, it is quite small. We're talking a blade length of... How big are you? Scale, right about 1.5 inches, inch and 3/4. We have a blade length of 1 inch and 3/4, which is actually a little bit longer than I thought it was going to be. Yeah, it's perfectly fine. I actually quite like this. It's good for opening packages and the like. The blade shape is very much acceptable. It does have these weird notches, and I know that that's kind of to fit the overall shape, cleanliness of the design. I'm not a huge fan of them. I feel like it's begging for somebody to try and apply leverage right there, and they're going to cut themselves eventually. But ignoring that, they're just kind of fine. The blade itself, like I said, perfectly acceptable, especially for something in and around that 2005 range. What I will say is that these pseudo nail nick long pull things suck. They're not deep enough to really grab your nail, and they've been heavily rounded over. They're shaped like nail nicks, but they have sort of the feel to them of a long pull, and it's combining the worst features of both. They need to be darker, deeper, and crisper, especially these sort of like quarter ones on the back. Like these are actually quite difficult to use, and what I found worked a lot better is digging my nail under the head of the tool and using that for leverage. So technically works, but these are rough. These are quite a rough experience. The pliers themselves I do rate. The knife blade I rate. The nail cleaner I rate quite highly. The tools on the back, I'm kind of take it or leave it on all of them except for the eyeglasses screwdriver. I think that is by far the most useful. But honestly, for what you get and the amount of space that it takes up, because this is a very small little multi-tool, I'm actually going to compare it. I'm not going to do my full comparison for knives. I don't think that would provide any value because this is not specifically a knife, and this is kind of a half-size multi-tool. But here it is next to a Zippo. As you can see, it has a very similar overall profile to the Zippo. It's a hair longer, but it isn't as tall. And it's a very, very similar in terms of thickness. And then the other one that holds value, let me just make sure I can actually find the damn thing. There it is my Leatherman Micra. As you can see, very, very similar overall length. The Gerber clutch is obviously a decent amount taller and a little bit thicker, but again, not by a ton. Overall, if you have the opportunity to pick one of these up, I do definitely think it is worth it. It is quite a cool little tool. T6 is pretty outdated at this point. I think everybody can agree that it would be better to have a set of T8s, but honestly, for a 2005 product, it is nice even just to be able to pull it apart yourself. Non-captive T6s are kind of a bummer, but they're not the worst thing in the world. Speed holes drilled out. Aesthetics are always kind of a very, very personal thing. I think it's kind of cool looking. I don't really think that you're gaining very much of a weight savings drilling through your aluminum like that, but you are providing some level of visual interest at the very least. Yeah, they're not by no means a complicated they are by no means a complicated pocket tool, but they are fairly functional and they do serve the needs very well. Obviously, they're no longer in production, then they aren't somewhere that you're going to be able to find necessarily if you go out looking, but if you come across one, it does make a neat addition to any collection. And I do think there are a few things that knife companies could stand to learn from this. In particular, the nail file is really, really good. It's super cool having it written on the back, which tools are where, and just not being afraid to give people a very small pocket-sized pair of pliers. Stay safe and have fun out there. Peace.